Welcome. Tonight, I'll be telling you a story that creeps in quietly, like the shadows of a town you thought you knew. It's called Funny How They All Disappear. The tale of Rowan Hale, a sleepless clerk who begins to notice strange flyers around his coastal town. Flyers with a smiling figure named Mr. Jumble. And with every flyer that appears, someone is gone the next morning. If you love slow-building horror, grounded in the everyday, where the fear comes not from monsters but from the systems around us, you're in the right place. So make sure you subscribe and let yourself drift deeper into tonight's story. Remember, stay awake long enough and you might notice what's vanishing right outside your window. Rowan Hale had long since stopped trying to trick his body into believing that night was day. The borough offices were mostly deserted after 11, the corridors carrying the sort of mechanical hum that only fluorescent light tubes and humming HVAC ducts could produce. His shift, technically records maintenance and night clearance, meant hours spent sorting through the little ephemera that most daytime workers never thought about. Expired posters, misprinted forms, leftover notices tacked to the wrong board. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept him paid and kept him out of sight. Rowan liked it that way. He began his shift at the depot's narrow desk, swiping his ID to clock in. The computer monitor flickered, a spreadsheet already open from the day team, inventory of public postings. A list of items, each with a disposal code and a fresh batch of flyers to go up on lampposts, bus shelters, and the corkboard inside the laundrette. Council business wasn't glamorous, but it ran on an endless cycle of posters and paper. He loaded the first satchel with neat bundles. Community litter pick, Saturday 10th of AM. Council tax deadline reminder. Play park repairs, expected completion 14th of June. The usual. It was when he moved to the second satchel that he noticed them. A stack of glossy flyers, thicker than the others, in a trim so professional they might have come from central government instead of local council print. White background, bold black type. Funny how they all disappear. That was it. No council logo, no sponsor name, nothing, except for a doodle in the corner, small, almost an afterthought. A figure, round-headed with two button eyes, wearing what looked like a little paper party hat. A grin stretched across its stitched mouth. Below it, in smaller type, Mr. Jumble says, "Keep your streets tidy." Rowan frowned. He flipped the sheet over, blank on the back. He'd seen his share of pranks before, teenagers sneaking their own flyers into the stacks or activists pasting slogans onto council letterhead. But this was printed on the same heavy stock with the same cut as the rest of the night's official run. He thumbed through them. Dozens, all the same. Carey, Rowan muttered under his breath, shaking his head. His manager, Gareth Carey, was fond of slipping oddball jobs into the route lists without explanation. Legacy categories, he called them. Just get them posted, Hale. Don't fuss. Rowan dropped the odd flyers back into the satchel, zipped it shut, and shouldered it. Outside, the air was damp with early spring drizzle. The town at night was a different thing than by day. Shops shuttered, flats glowing from a few kitchen windows. The sea air carried the faint rot of low tide across the streets. Rowan cycled from stop to stop, pinning fresh notices where instructed, stripping away anything outdated. It was mindless work, and the rhythm of it lulled him into calm. At the first bus shelter on Bay Street, he paused. Among the peeling posters for tribute bands and takeaway deals, a laminated sheet clung half-detached. He tugged it free. Missing, a ginger cat, Molly, last seen 3 weeks ago. A child's handwriting at the bottom, "Please call if found." Rowan sighed and slid the worn sheet into his folder for disposal. In its place, from his satchel, he pinned a play park repairs notice. Then, as he zipped the satchel, something made him look down. Another flyer sat on the shelter bench, curling at the edges from the damp. The same words in stark black, "Funny how they all disappear." The grinning doodle stared up from the corner. Rowan picked it up, running a thumb across its surface. Fresh print, glossy laminate, too new to have sat in the rain. He glanced up and down the empty street. Nothing but the drizzle. He tucked the flyer into his coat pocket, an odd unease curling in his stomach. By the time he reached Lena's cafe on Charter Row, his satchel was lighter. The cafe was dark inside, chairs stacked on tables, but the backlight in the kitchen glowed. He rapped lightly on the glass as he passed. To his surprise, Lena slid the bolt and leaned out, her hair tied in a loose bun, apron still on. "You working late again, Rowan?" she asked. "Always," he said, raising the satchel. "Council runs on paper, you know that." "Paper and tea," she said, smiling. "You want a flask for your rounds?" He hesitated, then nodded. She vanished into the kitchen and returned with a small thermos, passing it through the gap. As he thanked her, she squinted at the satchel. "You carrying those creepy things too?" "What creepy things?" "Those flyers with the bin man clown. One showed up taped to my door last week. Gave me the shivers." Rowan pulled the odd sheet from his pocket and held it up. "That one," she said, recoiling. "Exactly. Doesn't even say who it's from. Probably some health campaign," he said. "Anti-fly tipping. Carey likes to use leftover stock." She shook her head. "Maybe. But have you noticed? Whenever one of those goes up, a shop's gone dark the week after. Happened with the dry cleaners 2 doors down. Happened with that old newsagent on Ferry Street. Funny how they all disappear, right?" She tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle. Rowan pocketed the flyer again. "Coincidence? Maybe," she said. "But I don't like it. That mascot looks like he wants to eat something." He left her with the cafe shutter sliding closed behind. At the depot, past 3 a.m., Rowan filed his satchels and logged his route. He should have gone straight home, but something pulled him back to the flyer. He flattened it on his desk under the fluorescent light. That grin, those button eyes. He could almost hear Carey's voice. Legacy categories. "Don't fuss." Rowan turned the sheet over again. This time, under the glare, he noticed faint black digits pressed into the laminate near the bottom. A timestamp, 0311. He frowned. That matched his own swipe through the depot gate, down to the minute. He hadn't seen it before. The laminate was warm to the touch, as if fresh from the printer. Rowan shoved it into his desk drawer and logged off. Outside, the drizzle had stopped. The streets were slick with rain, and the sea smell was stronger. As he pedalled home, he passed the bus shelter on Bay Street again. His new poster hung limp, already damp at the corners. Beneath it, someone had taped a fresh flyer. Funny how they all disappear. The Mr. Jumble doodle stared at him from the corner. Rowan Hale had never been much for superstition. He kept his head down, logged the work, and didn't ask questions about where the paper came from or why the orders looked strange. Yet, in the week following his first encounter with the funny how they all disappear flyers, something about his shift changed. It wasn't just the flyers themselves, it was how they appeared. They weren't part of the standard lists. When he checked the depot's spreadsheets, he saw nothing unusual, just the usual reminders about recycling bins, parking suspensions, community cleanups. But each night, tucked into the satchel, there would be a few extra sheets. Not in the digital log, but printed and stacked with the rest. The same glossy surface, the same bold black lettering, the same stitched grin of Mr. Jumble in the corner. 1. On Tuesday, Rowan stopped halfway down Collier Street to double-check the bundle. He crouched beneath the orange glow of a street lamp, flipping through the stack. 15 council tax deadline reminders. 10 keep dogs on leads in public spaces. And then, slid neatly between them, 3 of the funny how they all disappear sheets. He ran a thumb across the surface. The laminate was still faintly warm. Above him, a flat's window clapped shut, as if someone had been watching. Rowan shoved the flyers back into the satchel and moved on. By the time he finished the route, every other lamppost seemed to have one pinned to it. Some looked freshly taped, corners tight, surfaces spotless. Others appeared curled as though they'd been there for days. He hadn't put half of them up himself. When he returned to the depot, he logged into the system to check the job list again. Same as always. But as he scrolled through, he saw an entry code at the bottom of the page, half cut by the margins. MRJMB 479. He'd never seen that code in his assignments. Add to, the next day, Rowan brought it up casually with Gareth Carey. Carey was the kind of manager who always looked like he'd just woken up from a nap. Creased shirt, tie askew, a smooth voice that never answered directly. "What's MRJMB?" Rowan asked, holding up the print log. Carey squinted, sipping his coffee. "Legacy category," he said at last. "Miscellaneous jumble. Old system." "Then why's it still active?" Carey shrugged. "Because it works. Don't fuss, Hale. Just do the routes," Rowan pressed. "Those flyers, Funny how they all disappear. That's MRJMB, isn't it? Carey's smile didn't change, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. Don't overthink it. You're on nights to keep things tidy, not to make puzzles out of them. Rowan let it drop. He knew that tone. In council work, when someone told you not to ask, it meant the answer was inconvenient. That evening, Lena caught him on his round. She had just finished closing the cafe, metal shutters rattling down over the glass. She leaned on the frame, arms folded. You seen the butcher's? She asked. Rowan paused. What about it? Closed. Just like that. All the meat cleared out, windows blacked over, no sign, no goodbye. Just gone. He frowned. People move on. Yeah, but the same night those flyers showed up. She nodded toward the lamppost outside her shop. A single sheet flapped in the breeze, the bold words, the grinning mascot. Rowan tore it down and folded it under his arm. You don't think it's odd? Lena pressed. Every time one of these things goes up, someone's gone the next week. The dry cleaner, the newsagent, now the butcher. Funny how they all disappear. She said the slogan with bitter sarcasm, spitting the words out. Rowan hesitated. He wanted to tell her it was coincidence, that the town was shrinking anyway, that shops folded all the time. But he couldn't quite bring himself to say it. Instead, he muttered, I'll look into it. 4:30 later that night, Rowan sat at his desk in the depot, pulling old files from the records database. He keyed in MRJMB as a search term. The results went back years. At first, the code was listed alongside routine campaigns. Neighbourhood Uplift Pilot Scheme 2011, Waste Amnesty Week, Community Refresh. Each had a smiling mascot graphic in the margins, a sack-like figure with button eyes urging residents to tidy up. The mascot had a name too, according to one PDF header, Mr. Jumble. But somewhere after 2015, the files grew thinner. The campaign name disappeared, but the code lived on. Notices with MRJMB tags included addresses, but no explanatory notes. Just vague lines. Resolved by voluntary move. Vacated overnight. Case closed. The more Rowan scrolled, the more unsettled he felt. It wasn't that people were being formally evicted. There were no court orders, no hearings. Just a record that they'd gone. Their complaints closed. Their tenancy agreements ended. Their files merged into inactive. And always next to the note, the code, MRJMB. 5 that week, Rowan's neighbour disappeared. Mrs. Kettle had lived in the flat across the landing for as long as he'd been there. A widowed pensioner with lace curtains and a shelf of ceramic birds in the window. She always said hello, always offered him a bag of boiled sweets she never seemed to finish. On Thursday morning, her curtains were open, the birds still lined up. But by evening her flat was dark, blinds pulled down. Rowan knocked. No answer. He tried again the next day. Still nothing. When he returned from shift Saturday morning, a laminated flyer was taped to the communal door. Waste Amnesty Weekend. Clear out your clutter. Mr. Jumble says, don't leave it behind. The grin stared out from the corner. Rowan stood there for a long time staring at the words. Clutter. Mrs. Kettle's flat was silent. Nah, 6. That night, Rowan showed Lena the flyer. She grimaced. They're targeting houses now? Targeting, Rowan asked. That's what it looks like. First shops, now people. She lowered her voice. What happened to your neighbour? He hesitated. Gone. Just gone. Lena crossed her arms. You don't think... I don't know what to think, he cut in. He rubbed his forehead. But the flyers, they're linked. They're always linked. She looked at him steadily. Then maybe stop putting them up. Tired. Rowan wanted to tell her it wasn't that simple, that the flyers weren't even listed on his job sheet, that they just appeared in his satchel as if slipped in by unseen hands, that Carey brushed it off as if it wasn't worth questioning. Instead, he said, I'll try. 7 that morning, back at the depot, Rowan opened the drawer where he'd kept the first flyer. He flattened it on the desk. Under the fluorescent light, he saw it again. The faint timestamp pressed into the laminate. 3:11, but this time another line had appeared beneath it. Tiny numbers, route deviation, ID R. Hale. Rowan froze. It wasn't just a flyer, it was a record. His record. Somehow his own ID card had been logged against it. The flyer wasn't just a notice, it was a document tied to him. He shoved it back into the drawer and locked it. The pattern was no longer deniable. Shops, flats, neighbours, marked by flyers, gone within days. And now the system had logged Rowan himself. Following the paper, Rowan Hale always thought of himself as a man without much of a history. He worked the night shift precisely, so he wouldn't have to spend his life around people who remembered him or asked too many questions. But the deeper he followed the trail of the flyers, the more he realized the history wasn't just his, it was in the system itself. The morning after discovering his ID on the flyer timestamp, Rowan didn't go home. Instead, he stayed in the depot past clock-off, loitering near the dusty record room on the mezzanine. Most of his colleagues never bothered with it. Filing cabinets groaned with decades of paper, planning notices, minutes from subcommittees, long-forgotten schemes that had been replaced by newer acronyms. Dust coated the edges of the drawers. The air smelled of mildew and old toner. Rowan pulled open a drawer labelled Miscellaneous Campaigns 2000-2010. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he found it. A thin folder, cover marked, Neighbourhood Jumble, Pilot Scheme. Inside were stapled leaflets, primitive versions of the flyers he'd been seeing. The slogans were softer then: clear the clutter, make space for better living. The mascot was there too, though cruder, more cartoonish. Still the round head, button eyes and paper hat. Mr. Jumble, already grinning. Rowan turned a page. There was a typed council memo attached, stamped 2008, open quote, "The Neighbourhood Jumble Scheme is designed to support voluntary moves from outdated or underutilised properties, encouraging community refreshment. Messaging will focus on cleanliness, clutter and positive turnover." Close quote. He stared at the language. Voluntary moves. Refreshment. It sounded less like housing policy and more like someone tidying drawers. At the bottom of the page, in small type, he saw a name under Junior Clerk. Records input. R. Hale. His own, too. Back then, Rowan had been fresh out of college, desperate for a steady paycheck. His job had been simple: digitize the incoming surveys, enter the codes, make sure the records matched. He barely remembered typing the data in, late nights with vending machine coffee. But here it was, his name on the earliest version of the program. He flipped through the file, notes from public consultations, most unsigned. Scheme has potential to clear eyesores. Ensure no resistance from tenants. Frame as voluntary. Mascot appeals to children, suggests fun. And then in scrawled pencil on the back of one sheet, funny how they all disappear. Rowan's throat went dry. 3. He photocopied the folder before Carey arrived, shoving the copies into his satchel. Then, instead of going home, he cycled across town to the council print works. The print facility was a squat building on the industrial estate, half empty now that most notices were digital. A handful of old offset printers still whirred in the back, overseen by a lone technician named Martin, a grey-haired man Rowan vaguely knew. Martin frowned when Rowan walked in. "Night shift lot don't usually come here." "I need to check something," Rowan said, trying to sound casual. He handed over one of the flyers. "You know where this was run?" Martin adjusted his glasses, holding the sheet up to the light. "That's one of ours. All right. Laminate finish, high-density stock. Council batch." "What batch?" Martin squinted at the corner. "See that code? MRJMB. That means Nightwater Services." "Nightwater?" Rowan frowned. "Who are they?" "Contractors," Martin said, shrugging. "Do a lot of back-end jobs for us. Scanning, shredding, running extra print runs. Outsourced ages ago. Anything that doesn't fit neat into a department goes through Nightwater." Rowan tucked the flyer back into his coat. "And they print these?" "They order them, yeah. We just run the machines. Orders come through an automated spool." Rowan hesitated. "Do you ever see who signs off?" Martin shook his head. "Never. Could be Carey. Could be some other manager. All I know is the files arrive pre-formatted. We just hit print." Nah, 4 that night. Rowan couldn't settle. He walked his route with a rising sense of paranoia, every lamppost a potential warning. At one bus shelter, he saw 3 different funny how they all disappear sheets layered over each other, as though someone had pasted them in shifts. At another, he found children had drawn moustaches on Mr. Jumble's grin with marker pens. The doodles did nothing to make it less disturbing. When he reached Lena's cafe, she was waiting. The shutters were already down, but she stepped outside with her jacket zipped tight. "You look awful," she said. "Did you ever hear of Nightwater Services?" He asked. She shook her head. "No." "Why?" "They're behind the flyers, at least the printing." "Contractors, you mean?" "More than that." Rowan rubbed his temple. They've been running this scheme for years, disappearing tenants, emptying shops. It started as a so-called neighbourhood refresh, and I worked on it. You? My name's in the files. Back in 2008, I digitised their data. I helped lay the groundwork without even realising. Lena's face softened. Rowan, that's not on you. You were just typing forms. He shook his head. But the scheme didn't end. It's still running, buried in the system. Every flyer is like a trigger, and now my name's showing up on them. She gripped his arm, then stopped delivering them. Rowan didn't answer. 5. He spent the next 2 nights trying exactly that. When he found the flyers slipped into his satchel, he left them behind in the depot. But when he reached his first stop on the route, the flyers were already there. Pinned, taped, laminated, fresh. It was as if someone else was shadowing him, always a step ahead, always making sure Mr. Jumble grinned from every surface. By the 3rd night, he gave up trying to resist. He still collected the evidence, though. Each flyer he pulled down, he smuggled back to his flat, tucking them into a shoebox under his bed. By the end of the week, the box was half full. The timestamps varied, but they all carried the same structure. A time, a route ID, a name. Some carried initials he recognised from colleagues in records. Others were unfamiliar. All of them looked like people being catalogued. And always, on at least one sheet per night, there was his own, R. Hale. 6th Saturday evening, unable to take the silence of his flat, Rowan went back to the record room. He keyed Nightwater Services into the archive. Most files were redacted, project numbers with no content, just the contractor name. But in one folder, buried under Community Uplift 2019, he found an appendix, a scanned invoice from Nightwater. Services rendered, print and distribution of community notices, resident engagement material, clearance of redundant units, records deletion consolidation. Rowan stared at the last line. Records deletion, that was his job. His entire shift existed to keep records neat, to tidy away the clutter. He flicked to the next page. A progress note, unsigned, typed in bureaucratic vagueness, open quote, Scheme MRJMB continues to yield successful turnovers. Resistance is minimal when messaging is positive. Residents interpret vacating as voluntary. Remaining traces are consolidated, clutter cleared. Close quote. Rowan let the pages fall from his hand. It was a program, not a prank, and it was still running. #7, the following week, Lena's cafe closed. No warning. One night, the shutters rattled down. The next morning, the windows were whitewashed. Chairs gone, kitchen stripped. Rowan stood outside the door in disbelief. He banged on the glass, shouted her name, but no answer came. On the lamppost opposite, a fresh flyer hung. Funny how they all disappear. The grin seemed wider than before. Rowan tore it down with shaking hands. When he unfolded it, he saw the timestamp. ZO 247. Route deviation ID R. Hale, Associated L. Morton, Lena's name. Logged, catalogued, erased. He stuffed the flyer into his satchel and walked home in a daze. The streets seemed emptier than ever. Every darkened shop front, every whitewashed window felt like a mouth closing. Back in his flat, he tipped out the shoebox. Dozens of flyers spilled across the floor, Mr. Jumble's grin staring from every corner. He crouched among them, hands shaking as if searching for a pattern. But there was no pattern, only the same message, repeated over and over. Funny how they all disappear. And for the first time, Rowan wondered if the next disappearance would be his. Rowan Hale wasn't built for confrontation. He had spent years cultivating invisibility, nights in half-lit corridors, the quiet scratch of bureau against inventory sheets, the steady turning of keys in locked filing drawers. But by the time Lena's cafe was shuttered and her name appeared on a flyer linked to his own ID, something inside him hardened. He had to know what Nightwater Services was. 1. The contractor's address wasn't easy to find. The council database listed only a P.O. box. Martin from the print works had muttered about back-end jobs and outsourcing, but he hadn't given Rowan a location. So Rowan started digging. At the depot, long after the last of the day shift clerks had gone, he sat hunched over the old desktop terminal. He keyed Nightwater into the financial ledger system. Most entries were scrubbed to bare invoice numbers, but one line, from 3 years ago, included a physical address. Unit 12, Hatherley Business Park. Rowan copied it down. The next evening, instead of heading to his route, he pedalled across the ring road to Hatherley. The business park was half empty, glass-fronted offices with to let signs, cracked asphalt lots littered with weeds. Unit 12 sat at the far end, a squat warehouse, lights dim inside, sign above the shutter barely legible, night water services ilted. Rowan locked his bike and stood for a long time before the shutter. He had no plan, just a rising dread. But finally he rapped on the metal door. Hashna too. To his surprise, someone answered. The shutter rattled up halfway, revealing a man in overalls. Mid-40s, pale skin, a ring of keys jingling at his belt. His expression was blank, not unfriendly, but unreadable. "Help you," Rowan swallowed. "I'm with the council. Records. Wanted to ask about the flyers." "Which ones?" Rowan pulled a sheet from his coat. Funny how they all disappear. The man didn't flinch. He just nodded. "Legacy campaign. Clearance support." "Who orders them?" Rowan pressed. "System does." "What system?" The man tilted his head, as though Rowan were the one asking nonsense. "Council system. MRJMB spool. Always been running." Rowan felt a chill creep through him. "And the names? The IDs? Tracking," the man said simply. "Helps tidy, keeps the clutter clear." Rowan gripped the flyer tighter. "They're not clutter. They're people." The man didn't blink. "Everything's clutter eventually." NAFA 3 inside the warehouse was mostly empty. A handful of desks lined one wall, each with a humming terminal. Stacks of sealed boxes sat in the corners, labelled with council project codes. The air smelled of toner and cardboard. The man led Rowan to one of the terminals. "You want to see? Look." He tapped a few keys. The screen filled with rows of data, names, addresses, dates. Each row carried a status: cleared, vacated, consolidated. Rowan leaned in. He recognised some of the names, shops that had closed, neighbours who had gone, and further down he saw it. L. Morton, cleared. Lena. His stomach lurched. The man pointed at another line further down. R. Hale, pending. Rowan stepped back. "What does that mean?" The man shrugged. "Means the system's queued you. Nothing to worry about. Happens to all of us." "All of us?" The man just smiled faintly. "Better when it's tidy." Shashja 4. Rowan stumbled out into the night air. His bike lock shook in his hands as he fumbled with it. The entire estate seemed deserted, as if the other units were husks. He pedalled back through town, every lamppost flyer now feeling like an accusation. Funny how they all disappear. Back at his flat, he locked the door, pulled the shoebox from under the bed, and spread the flyers across the floor. He tried to arrange them chronologically, by timestamp. He circled names he recognized. He drew arrows with a marker pen. Patterns began to emerge. Shops disappeared in clusters. Flats vanished in sequences. And always, somewhere near the centre of a cluster, his own ID appeared. It wasn't just logging him, it was using him. His routes were the spine of the disappearances. Every place he touched, every door he passed, became a candidate for clearance. He was the courier, the witness, the clerk, and the next piece of clutter. 5. The next day, Rowan skipped his shift. He stayed in bed, curtains drawn, phone switched off. He told himself he'd resign, walk away, leave the job and the town behind. But by evening, when he finally checked the communal door, a flyer was already taped there. "Clear out your clutter, night water services." The timestamp read 19-4. Route deviation, ID R, Hale. Location, primary residence. Rowan's flat had been logged. 6 desperate, he returned to the depot to confront Carey. The manager barely looked up from his desk. "You're late, Hale." "I went to night water," Rowan said, voice shaking. "I saw the system. I saw my name. I'm marked." Carey sighed, rubbing his eyes. "You weren't supposed to go there." "What is it, Carey? Tell me what's happening." "It's nothing sinister," Carey said smoothly. "It's efficiency, a system to keep turnover moving. Old properties, old tenants, they make way for new. Nothing personal." "They vanish," Rowan snapped. "Shops stripped overnight, flats cleared, people gone. That's not efficiency, it's erasure." Carey leaned back in his chair. "Rowan, you've been part of this longer than you realise. You helped build the database. You've kept it tidy for years. You of all people should understand." Rowan's throat tightened. "You mean Mr. Jumble?" Carey's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Mr. Jumble's just the face. The system needs a mascot. People respond better to a grin." Rowan shook his head. "Lena didn't respond better. She's gone." Carey's smile faded. "Then maybe you should stop digging before the system decides you're more trouble than clutter." 7 that night, Rowan didn't work his route. Instead, he sat in his flat, every light on, surrounded by the spread flyers. Mr. Jumble grinned from every page. His shoebox overflowed. At midnight he heard footsteps in the corridor. A faint shuffle, then a tap at his door. Rowan froze. Another tap. Then silence. He crept to the door, pressed his eye to the peephole. No one stood outside. Only a sheet of paper, freshly taped to the wood. He peeled it free with trembling fingers. Funny how they all disappear. Below the timestamp, for the first time, was a status. R. Hale, pending clearance. Rowan dropped the flyer, heart hammering. The system wasn't waiting for him to keep working. It was already inside his building, already inside his home. Rowan Hale didn't sleep the night the flyer appeared on his own door. He sat at the kitchen table, curtains drawn, every bulb lit, shoebox of flyers spilled across the linoleum like tarot cards. Mr. Jumble grinned at him from every surface. The timestamp on the new flyer, R. Hale, pending clearance, pulsed in his mind like a warning bell. The system wasn't waiting anymore. It had marked him as clutter. And he knew, deep down, that when the system marked you, you went. One at dawn, he made himself leave the flat. He cycled through the empty streets, past shuttered shops and blank windows until he reached the depot. The building was locked, but he still had his keycard. Inside, the hum of the fluorescent lights felt louder than ever. He sat at the terminal in records and pulled up the MRJMB archive. His hands shook as he typed his own name. The system spat out a file. Hale, Rowan. Status, pending. Clearance path, voluntary relocation. Method, administrative consolidation. Below that, a string of entries, years long. 2008, data entry, neighbourhood Jumble pilot. 2010, record consolidation, voluntary move notices. 2012 to 2023, ongoing clerical maintenance, MRJMB updates. 2024, route deviations logged, clearance acceleration. Rowan stared at it. His whole career collapsed into one neat chain of actions. He hadn't just been working alongside the system. He was the system. Every name he typed, every form he archived, every nightly route logged, it all fed Mr. Jumble's grin. His throat was dry. "It's me," he whispered. 2. He thought back to Lena, to Mrs. Kettle, to the butcher, the dry cleaner, the newsagent. All those flyers logged with his ID. They hadn't been coincidences. He had walked past their doors, noted their addresses, entered their names in the endless spreadsheets. His clerical neatness had catalogued them, sorted them, made them disappear. The flyers weren't instructions, they were receipts. Proof of work completed, his work. The mascot, the grinning sack-headed thing, wasn't a separate presence. It was his shorthand, his legacy. Mr. Jumble had been born in that pilot scheme where he'd keyed in survey data, where someone had doodled a figure in the margins. He'd carried it forward every night since. Rowan wasn't being hunted by the system. He was the system. As 3, he stumbled into Carey's office, clutching the latest flyer. "You knew," Rowan said, voice raw. "All this time, you knew it was me." Carey looked up from his desk, calm as ever. "It's not about you, Hale. It's bigger than any one person." Rowan slammed the flyer down. "My name's on every clearance, every timestamp. I'm the one logging them." Carey didn't flinch. "You're the clerk, yes, the mechanism. Every machine needs one." Rowan's vision blurred. "Then stop it. Take me out of it. I don't want to clear anyone else." Carey sighed, almost pitying. "You misunderstand. It doesn't matter whether you want to. The system runs because you've already built it. You gave it shape. You gave it order. You can't resign from yourself." Rowan shook his head violently. "I didn't choose this." "Of course you did," Carey said softly. "You chose neatness. You chose to tidy. You chose not to fuss. That's all the system ever asks." 4 Rowan fled the depot, but the truth followed him. Everywhere he looked, flyers fluttered. On bus shelters, taped to bins, nailed to telephone poles. The same bold words, the same stitched grin. Funny how they all disappear. And behind each flyer he could almost see the shadow of his own hand, his own keystrokes, his own weary initials signed at the bottom of forms. By evening he returned home, though it didn't feel like his flat anymore. The shoebox of flyers lay open on the floor. He sat among them, drowning in his own paper trail. One sheet slid loose from the pile, not one he remembered collecting. Its timestamp read, "Clearance completed, R. Hale." His heart froze. He was no longer pending. That night, Rowan heard voices in the corridor. The same shuffle of footsteps he'd heard before, but multiplied, as though several clerks walked in unison. Papers rustled, tape peeled. He pressed his ear to the door. A childlike voice whispered, sing-song and patient, "Clutter cleared, space refreshed. Funny how they all disappear." He staggered back. The voice wasn't outside, it was inside his head. The voice of Mr. Jumble. His own voice, echoed and distorted, the voice of every neat decision he'd ever made. He closed his eyes and saw the mascot clearly now. Not a sack-headed thing, not a cartoon, but a mirror of himself. Thin shoulders, tired eyes, paper hat like the council's ID lanyard twisted into a point. A grin stitched across his own mouth. Mr. Jumble wasn't a symbol, he was Rowan. 6 at dawn, the flat was silent. The shoebox lay empty. The flyers were gone. On the communal door a new notice hung. Property vacated. Unit cleared. Thank you for your cooperation. No signature, no trace. The neighbours would shrug, mutter that Rowan had moved on quietly in the night. His records would be consolidated, his name archived under cleared. Funny how he had disappeared. 7 weeks later in the depot, Carey trained a new night shift clerk. The lad looked nervous, pale under the fluorescent hum. He asked about the odd flyers in the satchel, the ones with the grinning mascot. Carey smiled faintly. "Legacy category, don't fuss, just keep the routes tidy." The boy nodded, shuffling his papers, and when he turned the first flyer over, he didn't notice the faint black digits pressed into the laminate. Timestamp, 2214. Route deviation, ID T. Lewis. The system purred on, neat as ever, and somewhere in its archive, Rowan Hale's grin lingered. Mr. Jumble, clerk eternal, keeping the streets tidy. And that was funny how they all disappear. Perhaps the flyers are still out there, waiting on a lamppost in your town, with that stitched grin. And perhaps next time, the name on the notice will be yours. If this story kept you awake, or carried you into sleep with unease, make sure to subscribe for more tales like this one. Every week, new stories, shadows, whispers, and things that slip quietly out of sight. Until next time, keep the lights low and watch closely. It's funny, isn't it, how they all disappear?